This is Taylor Mason, and I'm here today with Congressman Dwight Evans. This is an ongoing oral history project on the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, diversity in the House, and its impact on members and staff. Thank you so much for taking time to do this today.
Thank you.
All right, so I know you did an oral history with our office before, but if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to the House of Representatives.
I got to the House of Representatives with a very simple request that I learned from a gentleman who was head of the National Urban League. His name was Whitney Young. And he had a quote that one person could make a difference. And it is that statement, because I was working for the Urban League from 1976 to about 1979. It was his statement, because he was a follower of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he was very much, the Urban League was very significant from a national phenomenon. And I had the pleasure of working with them at the city level, the city of Philadelphia. And it was that statement that really contributed to my thought process as a young person thinking about how I can make a difference in my community, in the Black community. And that's the statement that led ultimately up to me running for public office, wanting to make a difference. So that's significant, where that came from.
Okay. So in the House, and even maybe your experiences in Congress more recently, what has been your story about being a person of color in the House and Congress? Do you believe there were extra hurdles in overcoming getting to public office, or even while you were appropriations chairman? Any experiences you'd like to share on that issue?
I think the person who helped me a great deal as a young Black male aspiring to make a difference was K. Leroy Irvis. And his conversation with me as I was trying to decide the role that I played in the process, and the conversation he had with me, I recall back in 1981, affected my thinking. So Whitney Young at the national level and the Urban League, and K. Leroy Irvis as the Democratic leader at that particular time, to a person who was about, well, I was 25 years old. If anyone affected my role in terms of playing in terms of Harrisburg, I would say he was the immediate. The other person I learned a great deal from was David P. Richardson, who got elected in 1972, who was the first African-American that I would say to you that I recall meeting, and who got elected in the state legislature. So he got elected in the state legislature. K. Leroy Irvis was the Democratic leader, and Whitney Young was a national leader. So those three individuals were very essential in affecting my thinking.
Okay. So your district when you were in the House was the 203rd, which was portions of Philadelphia. You were the first African-American to represent this district. So what did that mean to you, and what does that mean to you today?
Well, it was extremely significant. Though no one in my family had ever been elected, no one in my immediate family. And my aspiration to do that was a very appropriate moment, because you're talking about like in the 1980s, 1979, for the first time ever, that I would be elected in a position where I could make a difference, and that I was making. So I was on this track to make a difference in the lives of my particular community, and to be focused, and then to be a young African American male really was to do it the first time. It was a very competitive race. There was three or four other African Americans in the race. There were two non-whites, and to win it the very first time in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and the significance of Pennsylvania, put it in context, for the first time as a young person about 25 years old, to win, to be noted at that particular time for where we are today. When you think of, that was extremely momentous for that to occur.
And then kind of going off of that, you're the only person to this day yet that was the only African American to be chair of the Appropriations Committee. So what was that experience like? Do you have any stories you'd like to share regarding that experience?
That was immense. That in itself was, I had been in the legislature from 1980 to 1990 when I got elected. So those 10 years prior to when I got elected in that position, that in itself was extremely significant. And it was a role model that I was determined to be, because the mark that you figure never before had that ever happened. So to be in a particular position and to be significant upon a position that Ben Franklin used to hold. He held the chairman of appropriation. So obviously there's a gap between when Ben Franklin held it and when I got elected. That in itself was, and I don't think I or others around me understood the significance of the challenge that I had met. When you look back in 1980 when I got elected in the House, in 1990 when I became the chairman, I think that significance was something that was beyond any personal feeling I knew and understood. I don't think I fully understood it, but I think that my action at the Urban League from 1976 to 1979 certainly was factors that influenced. And then to turn around and to meet the late John Lewis, then in Washington, understanding that John Lewis used to be called the boy from Troy by Dr. Martin Luther King. And for me to go from the legislature and then to be a member of the United States Congress, and the committee that I was on, that I'm on now, is the Ways and Means Committee, which is in the Constitution. Matter of fact, Thaddeus Stevens was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee when Abraham Lincoln was president. So I didn't think at that time I understood the fullest implications of it, but I just knew within myself that opportunities was the sky was the limit. There was no limit to what my opportunities would be. And that was because of K. Lever Irvis, who eventually became Speaker of the House, and Dave Richardson, somebody who I admired and I was associated with. So those elements were building blocks to where I am today, to the fact that I was chairman of the Appropriation Committee and the impact that I could have upon the state and the nation. So when you say tell stories, I give you two examples. One of the examples would be the CHIP program, which is a program that started in Pennsylvania. It started with a gentleman by the name of Alan Kugovich, who conceptually came up with the idea, and Governor Casey was the governor. And I was the chairman of appropriation, and was the first major policy that I was able to come up with the funding mechanism to how do we fund the CHIP program. And I had an alliance with a Republican senator from Lancaster. We used the cigarette tax. We used half of the money for the farmland preservation program and used half of the money for CHIP. That was in 1980 something, 1980, 1990. But the point of it was that was significant. And that's when, you may recall, Hillary Clinton was the first lady and Bill Clinton was the president. And Bill Clinton was elected in 1992. I was elected as chairman of appropriations in 1990. So they was elected in 1992, I was elected in 1990. So always you look at states as laboratories of democracy. And here was a program that came from Pennsylvania. Governor Casey signed it, Alan Kruger was elected, and I was a part of that put it together to have a program which is now a national. The CHIP program is a national program. The other program I thought very significant was my role in what you call food access, and putting supermarkets in areas that had a need for accessible regarding food. And Michelle Obama, who was a strong advocate of a program called Let's Move and dealing with available food, and President Obama. So that's an initiative that I pushed and eventually got on the Agriculture Committee in the United States Congress. My first term going there, I got on the Agriculture Committee. And through being on that particular committee, that was a policy, it was in the Farm Bill. That was a policy that was a national, and still there. It's a finance program of access of supermarkets in urban areas in terms of available. So two initiatives I thought very simple. The CHIP program and the agriculture program, both are interconnected because food is medicine, and food is very important from a health perspective standpoint. So those are two things that I would say to you that stick in my mind, that came from as a result of me being chairman of the Appropriation Committee.
Okay. I'm actually going to share a picture with you and see you spark any memories with this photo. If you can see this. This is the 1983, 84, around there, the Black Caucus. And I know you've mentioned some people in this photo, but yes. You see these individuals here. Do any stories come to mind or anything you'd like to share about any individuals?
The gentleman to my right, Jimmy Williams, was from a district in West Philadelphia. He and I got elected at the same time, Jimmy Williams. He was a very good friend, a good buddy of mine. To my left is Kay Leroy Evans, who I learned an awful lot, who is the first person to appoint me on the Appropriation Committee. All right. Next to Kay Leroy Evans is Frank Oliver, who worked with me on the supermarket initiative because he was chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee. And then there's Dave Richardson, who was the chairman of Health and Welfare, who was a real activist and a real leader. He was there. And then to the left, the person standing up is Jim Barber. He was the chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee when I got elected and first came as a freshman. And then there's Hardy Williams, who's standing next to Jim Barber, who was really like the pioneer of independent Black politics. Hardy Williams, he ran for state legislator in 1969. He ran in 69. He ran before Dave Richardson ran and I ran, and Hardy Williams laid the groundwork. Next to Hardy Williams is Andrew Kahn. He was from North Philadelphia, where I was born. Andrew is a very good friend. He's still around today. And then there's Alfonso Deal. Alfonso Deal standing, who I got elected with. Alfonso Deal. He was a police officer. He was head of the NAACP. He was a very, and then there's Ruth Harper, who was like the first African-American woman when I was around. And she used to run a beauty school. She was always very proper. That was Ruth Harper. And there's Joe Preston, who's next, who was from Pittsburgh. That was Pittsburgh. He was a good friend from Western. And then there's Pete Truman. Pete Truman was a police officer with my uncle. Him and my uncle were police officers. And he was another good friend, Pete Truman. And then there's Shaka Fattah, who was elected after me, who served in the state Senate and then served in the United States Congress. And then there's Gordon Linton, who was big on transportation. As a matter of fact, when we put the transportation initiative together, he was appointed under the Clinton administration for a program in the federal. And then there's Ed Wiggins. Ed Wiggins also. Ed Wiggins was from South Philadelphia, and he was always very active on civil rights issues, very much there. He was a quiet person, but he had his way of making a point. Matter of fact, he wore a Ku Klux Klan suit on the House floor, which woke up a lot of people because he's raising the issue about the inequities, things like that. So that was a very dynamic group of people, all of them. I mean, and what can you say about Irvis was though he was not the chairman, he was really the leader of all of us. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was not the chairman of the Black Caucus, but his influence went far beyond. His influence was and this group of people I felt very good about, very positive about. They helped me tremendously grow and develop in terms of my own involvement, those people. You had Frank Albert, who had been chairman, Dave Richards had been chairman, Pete Truman had been chairman. I think Gordon Linton was chairman of the Black Caucus. It's rather interesting. We talk about remapping. I was the secretary of the Black Caucus. I was the secretary, and I was a sub-chairman on reapportionment, on remapping in my first term being there in terms of 1981, 1982. So I was a secretary and I was remapping, but that having this moment of this picture was very significant because, all these individuals were very positive people in their communities and beneficial for the sake of the state of Pennsylvania. And when you think about this picture, I think about this is the 50th anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus today. And, whereas the person, I'm the fifth in the state's history, I'm the fifth. Robert N.C. Nix was the first African-American congressman that was elected. Bill Gray was the second. A gentleman named Lucian Blackwell was the third. Mm-hmm. Shaka Fattah was the fourth, and I was the fifth in the history of Pennsylvania. So when you look at Pennsylvania, put it in the context that Robert N.C. Nix, whose son was the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, Robert N.C. Nix. So basically, when you see here, we all are built on the shoulders of others during that time. This was, like I said, you said 1983, and that was the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, and that was like my first term in moving there at that particular time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to tell you, every time I've showed this picture, your name comes up every time. They love seeing you, and Mr. Irvis and Richardson are the three big names I've been getting a lot of when I ask about other members.
We were, you know, I learned a lot. That's why I was sitting, I learned an awful lot from Kaylee Irvis and David Richards. And then again, if you put it in context, in the 1980s, you think about that time, and this is 2022, I learned an awful lot from Dave Richardson and Kaylee Irvis, you know, and what I do is on the shoulder. Can you hold 1 second? Can you hold 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
It's rather
Oh, okay.
is a picture and the first African American president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, if you talk to Ben or Randy, there's a picture, I was looking for it. There's a picture with me with the Congressional Black Caucus, with the whole caucus being this is it was held at the Vice President House, where you had the members of the Black Caucus that you see today, people like Jim Clyburn. And it's rather ironic that I was in the picture you just showed, and then I was in the picture that people like Jim Clyburn. And in Washington, they had an exhibit about the founding of the Congressional Black Caucus. Can you hold a second again, please? Hold one second.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get this. Black Americans, 1870 to 207. This is a book of when the first Black Congress people started. It's, you know, describes, it's similar to like the version you see in Pennsylvania in that document you have. This is the history of you know, Black Congress people and that. So what I feel very honored about this is to have served in both bodies, you know, in the legislature and the U.S. Congress, and the fact that, you know, Pennsylvania was one of the first states. Let me check from history. I was just reading this morning about the elimination of the emancipation. Pennsylvania was on record. If you check that out, they you know, Pennsylvania was in the forefront of the elimination of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about coming from Pennsylvania and its role that it has played, obviously the Keystone State Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, what it means, and to come to be a part of the body. I think all the things I thought about.
I have a couple more questions just about the Black Caucus in general. If you still are okay on time.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned some of your involvement with the Black Caucus, but what were some of the topics and issues maybe you worked on back then, maybe when you were in that photo, and maybe comparing that to what Congressional Black Caucus is working on today?
I think that what I worked a lot on was small businesses. I'm on the small business committee, ironically, and small and developing minority businesses. There's a book, if you look in my book, Making Issues Matter. In my book, there's a chapter that talks about the story I talk about in terms of Black businesses and the importance of Black businesses. And that's something that I still work on in Washington, D.C. I'm on the Small Business Committee, and I still work on that issue that I was working on in the legislature. I mean, that kind of led into the supermarket initiative. And that was something that I spent a lot of time in trying to do business development. The importance of building Black businesses was something I was hugely big on then. The other issue I recall very much, I work on, is very much about getting kindergarten to be mandated. When I started, trying to get kindergarten to be mandated was something that I worked on very well. The other thing was violence, gun violence. Gun violence was an issue that I worked on in the legislature, and I work on now that I'm in Washington, about the violence that has occurred, particularly the violence that has occurred in Black communities and how it has affected something else that I work on. So, you know, the distinction I described was Harrisburg was like a garden hose, and Washington is like a fire hose. So that's the distinction I seen between, you know, I dealt with, you know, the counties and townships, but in Washington, you're dealing with the entire nation and you're dealing with the world. So when I talk about food, I work very closely with the CARE organization. And I've been to Bangladesh, I've been to Argentina, I've been to Brazil, been to those places, and all talk about food and the access of food. I remember a gentleman here in Washington said to me, he was a ranking member on the agriculture committee. He told me, he said, "How many farms do you have in your district?" And I used to say to him, "You're asking the wrong question. The question you should ask is, how many consumers do I have in my district?" Because the producers and the consumers are hooked at the hip. And coming from Pennsylvania, and I was very active in agriculture, coming from Pennsylvania. Now that came about because of my role in the book will tell you about, because I was very active in the appropriation committee. And that's how I was a strong believer in making ideas matter. That basically had a lot to do with affecting the outcome of behavior.
Okay. So how's your service, either in the House or even Congress too, how's your service with the Black Caucus impacted your overall public office experience?
Well, as I said to you, with that group you saw, they were like brothers and sisters to me. I mean, I learned a lot. They helped my maturity in my position. You know, all of them played some role in influencing me in a way. And I really felt bonded with them. I felt honored to serve with them. Like I said about the gentleman named Pete Truman, who he served with my uncle as a police officer in West Philadelphia. And, you know, I learned a lot from him. He's older than me, but I learned a lot. I tended to be the youngest one in that particular. Like I said, I was like 25 years old, and I was very young, never being in public office before. Only the first time that I ever was in public office, and to be in public office and to be, think about it, Pennsylvania was like the fifth largest state. Pennsylvania, big state. You had California, New York, Texas, Florida. Pennsylvania was a huge state, one of the original 13 colonies. So, to be in a position in Pennsylvania was significant when I went to Washington because of the presence of Pennsylvania and what Pennsylvania means. So I was very proud that, and as a result, those individuals on the Black Caucus helped affect me. And I kind of build on the shoulders of things I learned a lot from all of those individuals, each and every one of them, and proud to now serve in the United States Congress. I think I'm the first one they look at that group besides Shaka Fattah, who served in Congress. I'm the second one to serve in Congress among that group. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, my last question for you then is, what advice would you give to other African Americans or people of color who want to pursue public service?
I would say to them about the importance of being committed. Committed to a cause. Go back to the statement I made, that Whitney Young made, that one person can make a difference. That in return influenced my thinking. So Whitney Young, National Urban League, the president of the National Urban League, and with me working at the Urban League during that time from 1976 to 1979, that effectuated my thinking a great deal to where I'm today. And there used to be a statement, once an urban leaguer, always an urban leaguer. That was something that just affected so much about what I'm my being and doing today. So my advice would be is the importance about being deeply committed and connected. That this element called the democracy is not going to just automatically happen. It's going to be a working effort. And it requires to be studious of understanding the historical aspect of the state or the country you may be from, or where you're in the United States. But that the most important title is citizen. It's not state representative, it's not Congress, it is citizen. Citizens, the element of citizen participation is the most sacred aspect of being involved. And I feel very fortunate that I've had this opportunity to be involved in what I consider a great state and great people and a great nation. And yes, it has its faults and it has its challenges, but it's a work in progress. And this is not something you should do. This is not for the lighthearted. This is about committed to a purpose. And those people you all saw, talk about Alfonso Deal, Ruth Harper, all were influencers to me. And as I sit here today, now being in Washington, D.C. on the Ways and Means Committee and the Small Business Agriculture Committee, I take note of those people that you showed that had a lot to do with being building blocks for me. And I would hope that members who are there, like you got Joanne, who's now the Democratic leader, and Jordan Harris, who's the Democratic whip. And you got people like Jake Wheat, who is now the chief of staff of the mayor of Pittsburgh. You got Ed Gainey, who's the mayor of Pittsburgh, never before had been. And you think about, you got Josh Shapiro running for governor. He used to be on the appropriation committee when I was chairman. Jake Wheatley used to be on the committee. Sherelle Parker, all those people were on the appropriation committee when I was chairman. All them were students, and they all was a part of things. All those people were part of, and all of them make up the fabric of what is a great state in a great position in a nation. So I learned from Irvis, because nobody does anything by themselves. I learned from K. Lever Irvis, Speaker of the Pennsylvania Legislature, first and the only African-American to be that, and then Dave Richardson. They were the ones who influenced me, and in return, as I communicate when you ask this question, I hope that others will understand the significant role that they can play, not just in the state, but in the nation.
Well, this has been great. Is there anything else you'd like to add or discuss regarding anything we talked about?
I think that what I'd like to stress more than anything is the importance of being involved and being committed, and putting forth an effort to make a difference. That's what you hear keep coming through my mind is over and over again about some way of making a difference and contributing to a better world and making it a better world and being a force in doing that. So that has really stuck in my head about the role that I have contributed to with others. You don't do it by yourself, you do it with others. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do these things today.
Well, it has been a pleasure meeting you, Congressman. I've been very anxious to talk with you today.